The moonlight streaming through the broken, stained glass window cast fractured colors across Clara Watson's sleeping face as she lay curled on the hard wooden pew. Her threadbare shawl pulled tight against the October chill that seeped through the abandoned church walls. She had been traveling for 3 weeks, ever since the bank foreclosed on her father's farm back in Missouri, and her feet were blistered raw from walking the dusty roads westward with nothing but the clothes on her back and 50 cents sewn into her skirt hem. The small town of Chloride, New Mexico Territory, had seemed like a mirage when she stumbled into it that afternoon in 1882. Her lips cracked from thirst, and her stomach hollow with hunger, and this forgotten church at the edge of town was the only shelter she could find that did not require money she did not have. Brandon O'Neill pushed open the creaking door of the church just after dawn, his worn leather boots making soft sounds on the dusty floorboards as he carried a bundle of fresh wildflowers he had picked for his mother's grave in the small cemetery out back. The sight of a woman sleeping in the second pew stopped him mid-step, his weathered hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip before he realized she posed no threat at all. She looked young, maybe 21 or 22, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and dirt smudged across her cheek. Her dress, once probably a respectable traveling outfit, was torn at the hem and stained with trail dust. Brandon was 30 years old and had seen enough of life to recognize desperation when he saw it. He stood there for a long moment, debating whether to wake her or let her sleep, when her eyes suddenly opened. They were green, he noticed, the color of spring grass after rain, and they widened with fear as she scrambled to sit up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders like a shield. "Please, I am sorry," Clara said quickly, her voice hoarse from disuse and dehydration. "I did not mean any disrespect. I will leave right away." Brandon held up his free hand in a calming gesture, the flowers still clutched in the other. "No need to rush off, miss. This church has been abandoned for near about 5 years now. Nobody uses it except me when I visit my mother's grave." Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes still held wariness. "I did not know it was abandoned. There was no sign." "Where are you heading?" Brandon asked, his tone gentle. He had a sister once, before the fever took her, and something about this young woman's vulnerability reminded him of family, of people who needed protection in a harsh world. "West," Clara said simply, then added with painful honesty, "or anywhere that will have me. My father's farm was taken. My mother died when I was 14. I have no other family." Brandon studied her for a moment, noting the proud tilt of her chin despite her obvious exhaustion and hunger. He made a decision that would change both their lives, though he did not know it yet. "I have a ranch about 3 miles north of town. It is not much, but the house has 3 bedrooms and I only use one. You are welcome to stay there, no conditions attached. You would have your own room, your own space, and 3 meals a day until you figure out what you want to do next." Clara stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "You do not know me. Why would you offer such a thing?" "Because I remember what it is like to have nothing," Brandon said quietly. "When I was 15, my father drank himself to death and left my mother and me with nothing but debts. We would have starved if a neighbor had not given us work and a place to stay. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would help someone else the way we were helped." He paused, then added, "My name is Brandon O'Neill. I raise horses and run some cattle. It is honest work and I am not a wealthy man, but I can afford to share what I have." Clara felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past month to last a lifetime. "I am Clara Watson. I can work. I am not looking for charity." "Did not figure you were," Brandon said with a slight smile that softened the hard lines of his sun-weathered face. A ranch always needs work, but the offer stands regardless. You need a place to rest and recover, and I have one to spare. She wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to maintain the independence she had clung to since leaving Missouri. But her body betrayed her with a rumbling stomach that echoed in the empty church. Brandon pretended not to notice, but he said, "I was about to head into town for breakfast at the hotel restaurant. Join me. They make decent eggs and the coffee is strong." Clara had not eaten a proper meal in 4 days. Pride warred with hunger and hunger won. I would be grateful for that. They walked together through the awakening town, past the saloon where a drunk was sleeping off his night on the front porch, past the general store where the owner was just unlocking his door, past the blacksmith shop where smoke already rose from the forge. Clara was acutely aware of how she must look, disheveled and dirty, but Brandon walked beside her as if she were a respectable lady in fine clothes, nodding good morning to the people they passed without a hint of embarrassment. The hotel restaurant was small but clean, with checkered curtains on the windows and the smell of bacon frying in the kitchen. The woman behind the counter, a sturdy matron with gray-streaked hair, gave Clara a long look but said nothing as Brandon ordered breakfast for 2 and led Clara to a corner table. "That is Mrs. Henderson," Brandon said quietly after they sat down. "She runs this place with her husband. Good people, but she likes to know everyone's business." "I am sure the whole town will know about me by noon," Clara said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. Brandon shrugged. "Small town, people talk, but most folks here are decent enough once they know you are not causing trouble." The food arrived quickly, and Clara had to force herself to eat slowly instead of wolfing it down like her body demanded. The eggs were fluffy, the bacon crispy, the biscuits warm with melting butter. It was the best meal she had tasted in months, maybe years given how lean times had been on the farm before they lost it. Brandon ate with the efficient movements of a man who viewed food as fuel, watching her discreetly as she ate. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "4 days ago. A farmer's wife gave me cornbread and buttermilk in exchange for helping her hang laundry." "And before that?" Clara set down her fork, meeting his eyes directly. "Are you asking if I am a thief or a beggar, Mr. O'Neill?" "Brandon, please." "And no, I am asking so I know how careful you need to be about eating too much too fast. Seen men get sick from eating too much after going hungry." She relaxed slightly. "I worked for my food when I could, went without when I could not find work. I never stole anything." "Never thought you did," Brandon said easily. He finished his coffee and signaled for more. "So what brought you all the way to New Mexico territory?" Clara considered how much to tell him. The whole truth seemed too pathetic, but something about his steady presence made her want to be honest. "I heard there were opportunities out west, teaching positions maybe, or work as a seamstress. I taught at the school near our farm for 2 years before it closed down when the town dried up. I thought maybe a mining town would need a teacher." "Chloride has a school," Brandon said. "Teacher is a woman named Miss Pritchard, but she has been talking about moving back east to care for her aging parents. School board might be looking for someone come next spring." Hope flickered in Clara's chest, small but warm. "Really, really. But that is months away. In the meantime, my offer stands. You can stay at the ranch, help out with whatever needs doing, and have time to figure out your next step." After breakfast, Brandon took Clara to the general store and purchased her a new dress, undergarments, stockings, and sturdy boots, ignoring her protests. "Consider it an advance on wages if it makes you feel better," he said. "Cannot have you walking around in rags. People will talk poorly about you, and you do not deserve that." The dress was simple calico, blue with small white flowers, but it fit well enough and Clara felt almost human again when she changed in the back room of the store. Brandon also bought her a warm coat, practical and plain, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the harsh New Mexico sun. The ride out to Brandon's ranch took about 40 minutes on the wagon, the dirt road winding through scrubby desert landscape, dotted with piñon pines and juniper trees. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The air was crisp and clean, so different from the humid thickness of Missouri. The ranch house was a simple adobe structure with a wooden porch that wrapped around two sides. It was larger than Clara had expected, well-maintained with neat curtains in the windows and a solid roof. Behind the house stood a barn, a corral with several horses, and a smaller building that Brandon explained was the bunkhouse for the two ranch hands he employed during busy seasons. "Right now it is just me," Brandon said as he helped her down from the wagon. "My hands, Jake and Samuel, are up in the mountains bringing down the cattle for winter. They will be back in a few weeks." Inside, the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room had a stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. A small kitchen occupied one corner, well-stocked and clean. Brandon showed her down a short hallway to a bedroom with a real bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "This was my mother's room," Brandon said quietly. "She passed 2 years ago. I have not changed anything, but you can fix it up however you like." Clara ran her hand over the quilt, touched by the obvious care in every stitch. "It is beautiful. Are you sure you want me to use it?" She would have wanted it. "My mother was a strong believer in helping people who needed it." He paused in the doorway. "There is a pump out back for water. I heat it on the stove for bathing. Privy is behind the house, clean and sturdy. Make yourself at home, Clara. I mean that." After he left her alone, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the past few weeks. She had been so focused on surviving, on putting one foot in front of the other, that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge how scared she had been. Now, in this quiet room with its soft bed and clean sheets, the fear drained away and left her feeling hollow and exhausted. She slept for hours, deeply and dreamlessly, and woke to the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. The sun was lower in the sky, late afternoon by the look of it. Clara stood and smoothed her new dress, suddenly nervous about what came next. What did Brandon expect from her? The phrase, "no conditions," echoed in her mind, but surely he expected something in return for his generosity. Brandon was stirring something in a pot on the stove when she emerged from the bedroom. He looked up and smiled. "Good, you are awake. I was starting to worry that you might sleep through until morning. Are you feeling better?" "Yes, thank you. I cannot remember the last time I slept in a real bed." Clara moved closer, drawn by the delicious smell coming from the pot. "What are you making?" "Beef stew. Nothing fancy, but it will stick to your ribs." He ladled 2 portions into bowls and set them on the table, then sliced thick pieces of bread from a loaf. "I am not much of a cook, but I know the basics. My mother made sure I would not starve if left to my own devices." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Clara worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Brandon, I appreciate everything you have done for me, but I do not understand why. You truly expect nothing in return." He set down his spoon and met her eyes. "I expect nothing that you are not willing to freely give. If you want to help around the ranch, that is fine. If you want to rest and recover for a few weeks, that is also fine. If you decide tomorrow that you want to move on, I will drive you wherever you want to go and give you enough money to get started somewhere else." "But why?" Brandon was quiet for a moment, considering his words. When I was younger, I thought I had to keep score of every kindness, every debt. Then my mother got sick with the consumption and the doctor bills took everything I had saved. I was bitter about it, angry at the world. After she died, I found her journal. She had written about how grateful she was that someone had helped us when my father died, and how she hoped I would remember to help others when I could. She wrote that kindness without conditions is the only kind that really matters, because it comes from the heart instead of from obligation. Clara felt her throat tighten. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was toughest person I ever knew and the kindest. Brandon resumed eating. So that is why. Because my mother taught me that we are supposed to take care of each other, and because you need help and I can give it. Over the following days, Clara settled into life at the ranch with a mixture of relief and lingering disbelief that her luck had finally turned. She insisted on helping despite Brandon's protests, starting with cooking meals that were far better than his basic stews and fried meat. She cleaned the house, mended his worn shirts, and organized the chaos of his kitchen cupboards. Brandon worked from dawn until dusk tending the horses and fixing fences and preparing for winter, often coming in after dark smelling of leather and hay and honest sweat. They developed an easy rhythm. Clara would have coffee ready when Brandon came in from the morning chores, and they would eat breakfast together while discussing the day ahead. She learned that Brandon had worked as a ranch hand for 10 years before saving enough to buy this property, that he loved horses more than cattle but raised both because you needed diversification to survive, and that his dream was to breed horses good enough to sell to the army. Brandon learned that Clara could quote poetry from memory, that she had wanted to be a teacher since she was 8 years old, that she played piano though she had not touched one in years, and that she had a quick wit that could make him laugh when he least expected it. 3 weeks passed, then 4. The ranch hands, Jake and Samuel, returned with the cattle and moved into the bunkhouse. They were good men, respectful and hardworking, and they treated Clara with the courtesy due to the lady of the house, even though she insisted she was just a temporary guest. Jake was in his 50s, weathered and quiet, while Samuel was younger, maybe 25, with an easy smile and a tendency to burst into song while working. Clara found herself thinking about Brandon at odd moments during the day. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his hands when he worked with the horses, the quiet strength in how he moved through the world. She told herself it was just gratitude, that she was mistaking kindness for something deeper, but her heart knew better. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire after supper, Brandon asked, "Have you thought about what you want to do? About staying or moving on?" Clara had been expecting this question, dreading it. "I have been writing letters to school boards in some of the larger towns. Silver City, Las Cruces, no responses yet. And if you get a response, an offer," she looked at him, trying to read his expression. "Would you want me to go?" Brandon was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low. "No, I would want you to stay. But I want you to do what is best for you, not what you think I want. What if I do not know what is best for me?" He turned to look at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I think you know. You are one of the smartest people I have ever met, Clara. You just need to trust yourself." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words, until Clara found the courage to say, "I like it here. I like the work, the ranch, the quiet. I like not having to worry about where my next meal will come from or where I will sleep." "Is that all you like?" Brandon asked, his eyes never leaving hers. Clara felt her cheeks warm. "No, that is not all." Brandon stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so their eyes were level. "I have been trying to keep my distance, trying not to pressure you or make you feel obligated. But Clara, these past weeks with you here, They have been the happiest I can remember in years. I look forward to coming inside at the end of the day because you are here. I find myself listening for your laugh, watching for your smile. If that makes you uncomfortable, tell me now and I will back away. But if there is any chance you might feel the same way, I need to know." Her hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I do feel the same way. I have been so afraid to admit it because I did not want you to think I was only responding to your kindness, that I was confusing gratitude with something real. And now I know the difference. What I feel when I look at you, when you walk into a room, when you smile at me across the dinner table, that is not gratitude. That is something much stronger." Brandon took her hand and kissed her palm. "I want to court you properly. I want to do this right." "We are living in the same house," Clara said with a small laugh. "I think we are past some of the usual proprieties. Maybe so, but I still want to do right by you. You deserve that." So Brandon courted her, and it was the sweetest thing Clara had ever experienced. He brought her wildflowers that he picked on his rides around the ranch. He took her on picnics to a beautiful spot by a creek where cottonwood trees grew thick and golden in the autumn light. He taught her to ride horses, patient and encouraging as she learned to control the gentle mare he picked out specially for her. He read to her in the evenings from the small collection of books his mother had owned, his deep voice bringing the words to life. Clara found herself falling deeper in love with every passing day. She loved his integrity, the way he treated everyone from the wealthiest rancher to the poorest drifter with the same respect. She loved his dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. She loved the way he cared for the animals, firm but gentle. She loved how he spoke about his mother with such obvious affection and respect. She loved that he listened when she talked about her dreams and never made her feel foolish for wanting more than what life had given her so far. In early December, Brandon asked Clara to accompany him to the church, the abandoned one where he had first found her. Fresh snow had fallen the night before, and the world was pristine white under a brilliant blue sky. They walked through the cemetery behind the church until they reached a simple grave marked with a wooden cross and the name Margaret O'Neill. "Mother, this is Clara," Brandon said, his hand warm around Clara's. "She is the woman I told you about, the one I found sleeping in the church. I know you would have liked her. She is smart and strong and kind, everything you always said I should look for in a partner." He paused, then added quietly, "I am going to ask her to marry me. I hope you approve." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks as Brandon turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know it has not been very long," Brandon said, "but I also know that when something is right, time does not matter as much as people think it does. Clara Watson, I love you. I love your courage and your kindness. I love how you hum while you cook, and how you always put fresh flowers on the table even though they die in a few days. I love how you see the good in people and in situations. I love how you make my house feel like a home. Will you marry me? Will you stay here not as a guest but as my wife, my partner, my equal in all things?" Clara could barely speak through her tears. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes. I love you too, Brandon. I love you so much that it scares me sometimes." He pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, gentle and sweet under the winter sky. It felt like a promise, like the beginning of everything good. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Methodist church in town, the one that was actually used for services. Mrs. Henderson from the hotel restaurant helped Clara make a simple white dress, and Jake and Samuel stood as witnesses. The preacher, a kind older man named Reverend Thompson, spoke about the importance of partnership and mutual respect in marriage, about two people choosing to walk through life together. When Brandon said his vows, His voice was strong and clear. "I promise to honor you and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to listen to your wisdom, and to build our life together on a foundation of love and respect." Clara's voice was equally steady when she replied, "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be honest with you, to support your dreams, and to love you with all that I am." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Brandon kissed her again, and Clara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The first months of their marriage were full of small joys and adjustments. They learned each other's rhythms, how to share space and decisions, how to navigate disagreements with respect and compromise. Brandon taught Clara more about running the ranch, involving her in decisions about which horses to breed and when to sell cattle. Clara transformed the house into a true home, adding curtains she sewed herself, arranging furniture to make the space more welcoming, planting an herb garden near the kitchen door for spring. Winter settled in cold and harsh, but the house was warm and their bed warmer. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, learning the landscape of each other's minds. Clara told Brandon about her childhood, about her mother's death, and how lost she had felt, about the slow decline of her father's farm and his spirit. Brandon talked about growing up with an alcoholic father, about the shame and fear of those years, about how his mother's strength had saved him. "She never gave up," Brandon said one night as they lay together, Clara's head on his chest. "Even when my father would drink away the grocery money, even when the neighbors whispered, even when things seemed hopeless, she just kept going. I used to wonder where she found the strength." "Love," Clara said softly. "She loved you. That can make people stronger than they ever thought possible." "Is that how you feel about me?" Brandon asked, his hand stroking her hair. "Yes. Loving you makes me want to be braver, better, stronger than I was before." "You were already all those things," Brandon murmured. "I just gave you a safe place to let them show." In February, Clara missed her monthly cycle. She waited another month to be sure before telling Brandon, nervous about how he would react even though they had talked about wanting children someday. When she finally found the courage to tell him over breakfast one morning, his face transformed with joy. "Truly, you are sure, as sure as I can be. I thought I would feel scared, but Brandon, I just feel happy." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it? I know we have not been married very long." "I am thrilled," Brandon said firmly. "This is the best news you could have given me. We are going to be a family, Clara, a real family." The pregnancy progressed well despite the usual discomforts. Clara continued working around the house and helping with lighter ranch chores, determined not to be treated like an invalid. Brandon fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement, insisting she rest more and worrying over every twinge and ache. "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara told him one day in April as he tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman, not my baby," Brandon said stubbornly. "Let me take care of you," Clara softened, touched by his concern. "I will let you help, but I cannot just sit around for months. I would lose my mind." They compromised, with Clara doing what she felt capable of, and Brandon helping with anything strenuous. Jake and Samuel treated Clara like a fragile treasure, constantly offering to help and checking if she needed anything. It was both annoying and endearing. In late May, Clara received a letter from the school board in Chloride. Miss Pritchard had indeed decided to return to Boston to care for her ailing mother, and they wanted to offer Clara the teaching position starting in September. "It is everything I wanted," Clara said as she and Brandon sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. A real teaching position in a real school. But, Brandon prompted, hearing the uncertainty in her voice, but the baby will be born in early October. I cannot start teaching just weeks before I give birth. It would not be fair to the students or the school board. Write to them and explain the situation, Brandon suggested. Ask if you can start in January instead, after you have had time to recover and adjust to motherhood. If they want you badly enough, they will wait. Clara considered this. And if they will not wait? If they offer the position to someone else, Brandon took her hand. Then another opportunity will come along. Clara, you are going to be a wonderful teacher whenever you start. A few months one way or the other will not change that. She wrote to the school board explaining her situation, and to her relief, they agreed to hold the position for her until January. It was the best of both worlds, time to focus on becoming a mother, and then the chance to pursue her dream of teaching. As summer arrived and Clara's belly grew round, Brandon found himself marveling at the turn his life had taken. A year ago, he had been alone, going through the motions of life without much joy or purpose beyond survival. Now he had a wife he adored who was carrying his child, and every day felt like a gift. He watched Clara bloom with pregnancy, her face glowing with health and happiness, and felt almost overwhelmed with gratitude. The baby came early on a hot September morning, 2 weeks before Clara's due date. The labor was long and difficult, 13 hours of pain that had Brandon pacing the bedroom floor feeling helpless, while Mrs. Henderson, who served as midwife for the area, coached Clara through each contraction. When the baby finally came, a strong, healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs, Brandon wept. He held his son with shaking hands, terrified he might drop him, amazed at how tiny and perfect he was. "He is beautiful," Brandon whispered as Clara, exhausted but smiling, reached for the baby. "You are both beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him Michael after Clara's father, Michael Brandon O'Neill. He was a good baby, content and alert, and he transformed their lives completely. Brandon, who had always been diligent about his work, now rushed through chores to get back to the house to spend time with his son. He would hold Michael for hours, just watching him sleep or stare at the world with wondering eyes. Clara recovered well from the birth, and by November she felt ready to start preparing lessons for her January start at the school. Brandon supported her completely, taking over more of Michael's care so she could focus on her lesson plans. They hired a young woman from town, a girl named Emma who was sweet and responsible, to watch Michael during the hours Clara would be teaching. In early January of 1884, Clara Watson O'Neill walked into the Chloride schoolhouse as its official teacher. The building was small but well-maintained, with desks for 20 students and a blackboard that someone had recently painted fresh. 15 students showed up that first day, ranging in age from 6 to 14, and Clara felt her heart swell with joy as she introduced herself. "Good morning, students. My name is Mrs. O'Neill, and I am very excited to be your teacher. We are going to learn so many wonderful things together this year: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and science. But more than that, we are going to learn how to think, how to question, how to understand the world around us." Teaching was everything Clara had hoped it would be. She loved the challenge of reaching students at different levels, the satisfaction of seeing understanding dawn in a child's eyes, the energy and curiosity of young minds. Some days were exhausting, dealing with discipline issues or students who struggled, but she never doubted that this was what she was meant to do. Brandon was incredibly proud of her. He would ask about her day every evening, listening to stories about student breakthroughs and classroom challenges with genuine interest. On days when Clara came home frustrated or discouraged, he would remind her how much she was making a difference in these children's lives. "You are giving them tools they will use for the rest of their lives," Brandon told her one evening after she complained about a particularly difficult student who refused to engage with the lessons. "Not every seed takes root immediately, but that does not mean you are not planting something important." Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Clara taught during the day while Emma watched Michael, then came home to her family in the evenings. Brandon continued building his horse breeding operation, slowly gaining a reputation for quality animals. Jake and Samuel remained loyal employees, becoming like family. Michael grew from infant to toddler, sturdy and curious, always getting into things and making them laugh with his antics. In the spring of 1885, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, both the challenges and the joy. She taught through the end of the school year in May, then took the summer to prepare for the new baby and rest. Their second son, Thomas, was born in November. He was smaller than Michael had been, quieter and more contemplative even as an infant. Brandon joked that they had one son with his wife's temperament and one with his own, the perfect balance. Clara returned to teaching in January with both boys being cared for by Emma during the day, though she admitted to Brandon that leaving two children was harder than leaving one had been. The years passed in a steady stream of seasons and milestones. Michael started school under his mother's teaching when he turned 6, bright and eager to learn. Thomas followed 2 years later, more serious about his studies, but just as intelligent. The ranch prospered as Brandon's reputation for breeding quality horses grew. They added more land, more cattle, and built a larger barn. In 1888, when Michael was 5 and Thomas was 3, Clara became pregnant again. This time, to everyone's delight, the baby was a girl. Sarah Margaret O'Neill, named for Brandon's mother, arrived on a beautiful April morning. She was tiny and perfect, with Clara's green eyes and Brandon's dark hair, and both her parents fell instantly in love. "A daughter," Brandon said with wonder as he held her for the first time. "I have a daughter. Clara, she's going to have me wrapped around her little finger before she is a week old." Clara laughed, exhausted but happy. "She already does. Look at your face. You are completely smitten. Can you blame me? Look at her. She is perfect." Sarah was indeed a treasure, adored by her older brothers who appointed themselves her protectors. Michael and Thomas would sit for hours entertaining her, making her laugh with their silly faces and games. As Sarah grew, she showed signs of having inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet strength. Clara eventually reduced her teaching to part-time, wanting to spend more time at home with 3 children. The school board was understanding, hiring an assistant teacher to cover the extra days. Clara found she actually enjoyed the balance better, having time for both her professional calling and her family. In 1890, Brandon made a significant sale of horses to the Army, a deal he had been working toward for years. The money allowed them to make improvements to the ranch and put savings away for the children's future. They had a frank discussion about expanding the family further and decided that 3 children was perfect for them. A decision Clara was relieved to make given how hard the pregnancies had been on her body. Life was good, better than either of them had dared to dream during those early days when Clara had been sleeping in an abandoned church, and Brandon had taken a chance on offering help to a stranger. They had built something real and lasting together, a partnership based on love and mutual respect. One evening in 1892, after the children were in bed, Clara and Brandon sat on the porch watching the stars come out. They did this often, treasuring these quiet moments together after the chaos of family life. You ever think about that day I found you in the church?" Brandon asked, his arm around Clara's shoulders. "All the time," Clara admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how hopeless everything seemed. I had 50 cents to my name and no idea what I was going to do. And then you walked in and offered me a home with no conditions attached. It changed my entire life." "It changed mine too," Brandon said. "I did not know how lonely I was until you were there. The house felt empty before you. Now it is full of noise and laughter and love." Clara turned to kiss him, a gesture that still felt as meaningful as it had the first time. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for seeing past the dirty dress and the desperate circumstances to the person underneath." "Thank you for trusting me enough to accept help," Brandon replied. "Thank you for making me believe in second chances and new beginnings. Thank you for being my partner in all things." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in the corral, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl. This was peace, Clara thought. This was contentment. This was everything she had never dared to hope for during those dark days of traveling west with nothing but hope to sustain her. The years continued to pass in that good way that time moves when life is full. Michael grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books and learning as much as his mother did. He talked about becoming a lawyer, about using education to help people who could not help themselves. Brandon and Clara supported this dream completely, proud of their son's idealism and sense of justice. Thomas developed a deep love for the ranch and the animals, showing a natural talent for horse training that surpassed even his father's abilities. By the time he was 14, he was handling horses that seasoned cowboys struggled with, patient and intuitive in his approach. Brandon knew the ranch would be in good hands when he was ready to pass it down. Sarah, their baby girl, proved to be a perfect blend of both parents. She loved learning and reading like her mother, but also had a practical streak and love of the outdoors like her father. She would help her mother prepare lessons, and then spend the afternoon riding the ranch with her father, equally happy in both worlds. In 1897, on Clara and Brandon's 15th wedding anniversary, their children conspired with Jake and Samuel to give them a surprise celebration. The ranch hands decorated the barn with wildflowers and lanterns, and the whole family gathered for a special dinner. Michael, now 14, gave a speech about how his parents had shown him what real love looked like. Thomas, 12, presented them with a beautiful wooden box he had carved himself. Sarah, 9, sang a song she had written about family. Clara cried through the whole evening, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had been given. When Brandon stood to make a toast, his voice was thick with emotion. 15 years ago, I found a woman sleeping in an abandoned church, and I made a decision to offer her help with no conditions attached. I did not know that day that I was actually helping myself, that I was inviting into my life the person who would make me whole. Clara, you have given me everything that matters. A family, a home full of love, a purpose beyond just surviving. You have made me a better man than I ever thought I could be. I love you more today than I did when we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for every day since." Clara stood and kissed him, not caring that their children and ranch hands were watching. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for offering kindness when I had nowhere else to turn. Thank you for loving me the way you do, as a partner and equal. These 15 years have been the best of my life, and I cannot wait to see what the next 15 bring." As the evening wound down and the children eventually went to bed, Clara and Brandon found themselves back on the porch, their favorite spot for reflection. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Clara asked. When I asked why you were helping me, I said I remembered what it was like to have nothing, Brandon replied. That someone had helped my mother and me when we needed it, and I wanted to pass that kindness forward. Your mother would be so proud of you, Clara said softly. Of the man you are, the father you have become, the life you have built. I wish I could have known her. She would have loved you, Brandon said with certainty. She always said that the measure of a person was not in their circumstances, but in how they responded to those circumstances. You were down to nothing, but you never lost your dignity or your hope. She would have recognized that strength immediately. Clara leaned into him, comfortable and content. They had been through so much together over the years. Hard winters and difficult births, financial struggles and health scares with the children, the normal trials that come with building a life. But they had weathered everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge faced and overcome. In 1900, as a new century dawned, the O'Neill family gathered on the porch to watch the sun set on December 31st. Michael was 17 now, preparing to leave for university back east in the fall. Thomas was 15, already taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Sarah was 12, blossoming into a beautiful and intelligent young woman. A new century, Clara marveled. Who knows what the next 100 years will bring, what changes we cannot even imagine. As long as we face it together, Brandon said, pulling her close, I am not worried. We have built something strong here, a family, a legacy, a love that will outlast us. Michael, overhearing his father, spoke up. When I have children someday, I want to tell them the story of how you met. About how Mama was sleeping in a church, and Papa offered her a home with no conditions attached. It is the most romantic thing I have ever heard, Clara laughed. Romance is a lot of things, Michael. It is grand gestures sometimes, but more often it is the small daily choices to love and support each other. It is your father getting up early to make me coffee on cold mornings. It is working together to build something meaningful. It is choosing each other over and over again, even when things are hard. It is finding the right partner, Brandon added. Someone who makes you better, who you can trust completely, who sees all of you and loves you anyway. That is what I found when I found your mother. As midnight approached, they lit lanterns and placed them around the porch, creating a circle of light against the darkness. When the new century officially arrived, Brandon kissed Clara while their children cheered, and Clara thought about how far they had both come. From that desperate young woman sleeping in an abandoned church to this, a full and beautiful life surrounded by love. The years after the turn of the century brought changes, as years always do. Michael left for university and thrived there, eventually becoming the lawyer he had dreamed of being. He returned to New Mexico to practice, dedicating himself to helping small ranchers and farmers protect their land rights. Brandon and Clara could not have been more proud. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Brandon moved into his 50s, proving to be an even better horseman than his father. Under his management, the O'Neill Ranch became one of the most respected horse breeding operations in New Mexico. He married a sweet girl named Annie from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Brandon and Clara their first grandchildren, twin boys born in 1905. Sarah pursued teaching like her mother, attending normal school and returning to teach in chloride. She had her mother's gift for reaching students and her father's patience. In 1907, she married a doctor who had recently moved to town, a good man named James who adored her completely. Brandon and Clara moved gradually into their roles as grandparents, delighting in the next generation. They remained active and involved in ranch life and the community, respected pillars of chloride society. Clara continued teaching part-time well into her 50s, finally retiring in 1910, when her knees started bothering her too much for the daily walk to the school. One afternoon in 1912, 30 years after they had met, Clara and Brandon made a special trip to the abandoned church. It was even more dilapidated now, the roof partially collapsed and weeds growing through the floorboards. But the pew where Clara had slept was still there, weathered and worn. "This is where it all started," Clara said, running her hand over the old wood. 30 years ago, I laid down on this pew thinking my life was over, that I had nothing left. I could never have imagined everything that was coming. The love, the family, the joy. None of it seemed possible that night. Brandon stood beside her, his hair now more gray than dark, his face lined with the years of sun and wind and living. But his eyes were the same when he looked at her, full of love and admiration. "I walked through that door planning to leave flowers on my mother's grave. I never expected to find the woman who would change my life. But there you were, and something in me knew. I cannot explain it, but I knew you were important." Clara turned to face him, taking both his hands. "Do you have any regrets? Any wishes that things had been different?" "Not a single one," Brandon said firmly. "Every choice I made, every path I took, it all led me here. Led me to you. How could I regret that?" They kissed there in the abandoned church, the same church where their story had begun 3 decades earlier. Outside, through the broken windows, they could see the cemetery where Brandon's mother was buried. Clara liked to think Margaret was watching over them, pleased with how things had turned out. That evening, back at the ranch, surrounded by their children and grandchildren who had gathered for Sunday dinner, Clara felt a profound sense of completion. This was what happiness looked like. Not a single moment of perfection, but a lifetime of moments strung together. The good days and the hard days, the celebrations and the sorrows, all of it woven into a tapestry of a life well lived. Michael's oldest son, 6-year-old Brandon Jr., named for his grandfather, climbed into Clara's lap and asked, "Grandma, tell us the story again, about how you and Grandpa met." Clara smiled and began the familiar tale. "Well, it was October of 1882, and I had been traveling for 3 weeks with nowhere to go and no one to help me. I was tired and hungry and scared, and I found an old abandoned church at the edge of town. I thought at least I would be safe and dry for one night, so I laid down on one of the pews and fell asleep. The next morning, a cowboy walked into that church. He was tall and kind-looking, and he was carrying wildflowers for his mother's grave. When he saw me, he could have chased me away. He could have ignored me, but instead he offered me a home with no conditions attached. He took a chance on a stranger, and that changed both our lives forever." "Because he was nice?" Brandon Jr. asked. "Because he had a good heart," Clara corrected gently. "Because his mother had taught him that we are supposed to take care of each other. And because sometimes when you offer kindness to someone who needs it, you get even more back than you gave." Young Brandon considered this, then said, "When I grow up, I want to be nice like Grandpa." Brandon, listening from across the room, felt his eyes grow damp. "That is the best thing anyone has ever said about me, buddy." As the evening wore on and the family gradually departed for their own homes, Clara and Brandon found themselves alone again. They walked out to the porch, drawn as always to their favorite spot. The land stretched out before them, familiar and beloved. Horses grazed in the pasture, the barn stood solid and strong, the mountains rose eternal in the distance. "We did good, did we not?" Brandon said, his arm around Clara's waist. "Built something worth building." "We did very good," Clara agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Brandon, thank you for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For offering me a home when I had nowhere to go. For loving me the way you do. For being the partner I needed. not just in the beginning but every day since. "It has been my honor," Brandon said simply. "Loving you has been the easiest and best thing I have ever done. Every morning I wake up grateful that you said yes, that you trusted me, that you chose to build this life with me." They stood together as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, painting the New Mexico sky with color. 30 years of marriage, 3 children, multiple grandchildren, a lifetime of love and partnership. It had all started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy offering a stranger a home with no conditions attached. In the years that followed, Brandon and Clara grew old together with grace and dignity. They remained each other's best friend and greatest support, facing the challenges of aging with the same partnership that had sustained them through everything else. When Brandon's health began to fail in 1920, Clara nursed him with devotion, and when he passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 68, she held his hand and told him how much she loved him one last time. Clara lived another 5 years after Brandon's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with the world. She spent her time writing down the family history, making sure future generations would know the story of how their family began. She wrote about the abandoned church, about the kindness of a cowboy named Brandon O'Neill, about how one act of generosity had rippled out to touch so many lives. When Clara died in 1925 at age 63, the entire town of Chloride turned out for her funeral. Her students, now grown with children of their own, spoke about what her teaching had meant to them. Her children and grandchildren shared stories about her strength, her wisdom, her capacity for love. She was buried next to Brandon in the cemetery behind the old abandoned church, the place where their story had truly begun. On Clara's gravestone, Michael had inscribed the words his mother had often said were the most important ones in her life. She was sleeping in a church. He offered her a home with no conditions. Below that, a second line. Together they built a legacy of love. The O'Neill Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The house that Brandon had shared with Clara remained in the family for generations, with each new generation hearing the story of how it all began. The family made sure the abandoned church was maintained over the years, eventually restoring it as a historical site, so others could visit the place where Brandon and Clara's love story had started. Michael's law practice grew into a respected firm that continued to serve the people of New Mexico for decades. Sarah's children became teachers and doctors and ranchers, carrying on the values their grandparents had instilled. The family tree expanded and flourished, branches reaching out into the future, all of it rooted in that single moment when a cowboy chose kindness over indifference. The story of Brandon and Clara became a cherished family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It was a reminder that life could change in an instant, that kindness mattered, that love could flourish in the most unlikely circumstances. It was proof that sometimes the best things in life began with a simple choice to help someone in need, with no expectations and no conditions. In the end, what Brandon and Clara built together was more than a ranch or a family or even a love story. They had created a legacy of compassion, partnership, and unwavering commitment to each other and to the values they held dear. They had shown their children and grandchildren what real love looked like, not the easy kind that flourishes only in good times, but the deep, abiding kind that grows stronger through shared trials and everyday choices. The abandoned church still stood at the edge of what had become a much larger town, preserved now as a piece of history. Visitors came to see where Clara had slept that long-ago night, where Brandon had found her and offered her a home. A plaque on the wall told their story, a testament to how one act of kindness had changed 2 lives and created ripples that spread across generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted just right through the old windows, people swore they could feel something special in that place. A sense of hope, perhaps, or possibility. The echo of a moment when everything changed, when a desperate woman and a kind-hearted cowboy found each other and built something beautiful together. It was a reminder that no matter how dark things might seem, there was always the possibility of light, always the chance that tomorrow might bring something wonderful, always the hope that kindness and love could triumph over hardship and loneliness. The story of Brandon O'Neill and Clara Watson lived on, generation after generation, a beacon of hope and a promise that love, when built on a foundation of respect, partnership, and unwavering commitment, could overcome anything. It was a story that began with a woman sleeping in a church and a cowboy who offered her a home with no conditions, and it became a love that would last forever.